The state of Texas and the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department have had every chance needed to purchase the Fairfield Lake State Park, but they did not. They have waited until a private developer has purchased the property to build a gated community with upscaled homes, which in turn would increase our county tax income by an estimated $20 million annually. This development will also add approximately 200 well-paying jobs locally. The developer will not be lowering the water level of the lake or endangering wildlife as rumored. We the people cannot stand by and let this set precedents for the future of land ownership freedom. If we do nothing, our right to own property will never be safe again. They must be stopped. Ad paid for by Fairfield Land Management.
Get ready, blues fans. The Wortham Area Chamber of Commerce is proud to present the Wortham Blues Festival Saturday, September 9th in historic downtown Wortham. Gates open at 5 p.m. and music gets underway at 6. Celebrate the best of blues with a night of live music featuring Gary Kane, the Peter Sinclair Band, Harold Walker, and Frank Hasty and Demerge. Tickets are $15 for adults, $5 for kids ages 6 to 12. One question, though, I thought about it on my way into the studio. How long does it take to build a golf course?
Well, it takes about 2 years. And,
okay.
That's about the
I actually kind of thought, probably a 2-year process because that's not an easy thing to do.
No, soil conditions mean a lot, sand, the DNA of the soil, and the timing when you sod your grass. And,
okay.
You got to have water. So
you got to have water. Amen to that. Well, we know that this summer.
Absolutely.
Holy smokes. All right, let's talk about this, the story that broke this past week, and people once again wanting to know who your investors are and all of this other, I don't even know what to call it at this point, because I thought you were pretty clear in your press conference in regards to who the investors were.
Yeah, well, I think it's trying to be very delicate in how I respond.
I understand.
Lloyd, desperate people take desperate measures, Buzz. And we received yesterday morning a notification from Senator Lois Kolkharst's office.
Okay.
I actually met the senator when this bogus bill around water came up and went to the Senate Finance on Water, Agriculture, and Resources. Senator Kolkharst was in that. And everybody scathingly shot that bill down. It was purely designed to blow up our business transaction. But yes, Senator Kolkharst entered a press release that basically talks about a Chinese Red Army general that bought 1,000 acres somewhere, and then takes that statement and ties it to a bill that she evidently got approved in the Senate. It didn't make it out of the House. But some way she takes a Chinese Red Army general that bought 1,000 acres and plays that over to we need to investigate and ask hard questions about my transaction. So let me just say again clearly, Buzz, I've got about a dozen red-blooded Oklahoma, Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth, hardworking entrepreneurs, successful businessmen and women, family offices, oil and gas people,
right?
Entrepreneurs that own real property and ranches that are my investors. My lender, if Senator Kolkharst had just called me, which she didn't, I didn't know anything about this, so I received it from a journalist. If she wants to know something about my lender, my suggestion is that she call, I think, one of the greatest patriots in the state of Texas and America, H. Ross Perot.
And here's, for me, the disappointing thing about the press release from the senator, because the headline of the press release is Texans deserve a fair look at the Fairfield Park deal. From what I understand, Todd Interest purchased the land from Vistra Energy. Fairfield Park at that point did not exist. And that's the irritating thing for me. People keep trying to make this something that it's not.
Well, and I think it's, look, you've got a former park board chairman that yesterday was his last day.
Right.
And I find it highly interesting and somewhat fascinating that this press release would be issued. I think there's a presumption that people that live in rural America, I'm from Ada, Oklahoma. Grew up with 30 head of black Angus, 2 sorry horses my dad got from the sheriff, and four pigs that never made money. But there's some reason that some people think that those of us who grew up in rural America and lived on farms and ranches and drive trucks and carry Red Man in our back pocket, that we must not just be as smart as everybody else. Parks and Wildlife, it's been a travesty, the leadership that's there. And to me, this is, I would hope it'd be the final false narrative that comes up on this transaction. But maybe it's a party mea culpa or salvo from the ownership that's gone. I have no idea. But it's a sad state that this is what we're seeing people resort to.
A shot across the bow, as it were. Let's talk about some of the new rules that came out. I think this was a couple of weeks ago. New rules regarding the power of eminent domain.
Well, correct. And I mean, the park board had a meeting last week, and this was their policy that they wanted to establish as to the rare and unusual circumstances that they would only use eminent domain.
Right.
And, I wrote an editorial to the Dallas Morning News in response to Chairman Applin's editorial because he wouldn't talk to anybody. Parks and Wildlife said that editorial was the final word. And I said in my editorial that I hope that these board members would gather around Chairman Applin and provide some counsel and some wisdom.
Right.
And there's nothing more fascinating than the man in the middle of self-justification. And I feel like these guidelines, and I'm happy to address them, are a little bit of self-justification. One of the interesting things I think that they did, Buzz, is that they said that an exceptional and unusual circumstance means when property was previously dedicated to public use as a park, and the property owner rejects an offer to voluntarily convey the property. Well, the state of Texas never owned the 1,800 acres that they leased from us. Frankly, that property is put on the open market for sale. My firm bought it, so even the sheer face of what they're saying is wrong because, by the way, it was just 1,800 acres they had a lease under. They were never an ochre, and they've yet to do it. They've said they're going to condemn us. They've yet to do it. They've yet to file a lawsuit. They've yet to do anything regarding condemnation.
Right.
But I think it's somewhat interesting because they say in exercising the power of eminent domain, the commission will consider factors like the amount of public investment in the property. Okay. So that's kind of interesting to me because the narrative that Parks and Wildlife is carrying right now is that they have $70 and upwards of $80 million invested actually in the property. And Buzz, I'd like for just Parks and Wildlife, they have a fiduciary duty to share their information. Why don't they just share with the general public exactly what the amount of infrastructure money is they've invested in that property?
I have heard a lot of people ask that same thing.
It's my understanding that they won't answer that question. I think they failed to remember that when they appear before these House and Senate hearings and committee meetings, Vistra, early on in this, last March, a statement was made by former state Senator Ken King, who used to be over Parks and Recreation. Now it's Trent Ashby, Cultural, Recreation, and Tourism, the House committee, that oversees parks. And a statement was made that $70 to $80 million by a park representative. And the Vistra spokesman got up and said, I want to be very clear about something. We do a lot of development around the country. And our group has looked at this and said we would have a hard time seeing that the state has even invested roughly $10 million in this property that we've leased to you. The response then from a Parks and Wildlife representative, Rodney Franklin, was the following. Well, that's our estimate of today's dollars. Well, I'm going to tell you this, having owned this property now for 90 days and seeing the schlocky nature of the plastic boat docks, the years of no maintenance to the infrastructure that's there. For the state to use this as a reason for public investment, just tell us the amount. I will say this. In the next to last lease amendment that Parks and Wildlife did with Vistra, which was in 2020, they had in that present lease that if Vistra terminated the lease, that they would have to pay Parks and Wildlife back $1 million. $1 million for the amount of investment they had in their property. When they did another amendment, because Parks wanted more time, Vistra gave them an extension until year-end 2022. And that got exculped from the lease. It didn't stay. So, again, back to these points, I really would love to challenge that one and have them kind of show the general public exactly how much money they have invested in the infrastructure. The next one is the level of public support for the acquisition, the number of visitors that serve the property while dedicated to public use. Well, let's talk about that one. The level of public support. The legislature was against eminent domain. Angelia Orr's bill never made it out of the House. Okay?
Correct.
Second, out of committee. Secondarily, State Senator Schwartner, his bill on eminent domain never made it out of his committee. And then this cockamamie water bill that Angelia Orr, she literally said, hopefully this will keep the transaction from happening. That didn't go anywhere. And then the one that I think riddles all of us or many of us the most is when it talks about public support. The highest ranking officials in this county, the county commissioners, they represent every district of this county. We literally find ourselves where the county commissioners have had a lawyer write a public retraction letter to Parks and Wildlife demanding a public apology, demanding a correction of the false statements made. Okay? The commissioners unanimously stated they're against eminent domain. So when it comes to public support, I guess if those elected bodies who speak for all of us,
right?
Okay, well then Parks and Wildlife did a opinion poll on their website, and I think they had less than 300 respondees of their own drafted opinion poll. So for the 10 million visitors, now let's talk about, so no real public support. Now let's talk about the visitors. Chairman Applin's own words in his Dallas Morning News editorial that 10 million people visited Texas parks across the state last year.
Okay, across the state.
That's exciting. Okay, and I hope that number will grow. Okay? But he said that Fairfield State Park had 80,000 visitors. So my Ada, Oklahoma math tells me that less than 1% of all people who visited a state park attended Fairfield Lake State Park. So what I find somewhat interesting, Buzz, Parks and Wildlife has openly shared now, and we've known this, that for the year 2024 and 2025, they just got approved $125 million to buy property for their entire budget.
Yes.
So they are well aware of what we paid for our property. They are well aware of the appraisal of the value of our water rights alone for our property. So who in their right mind would spend every penny of their $125 million for less than 1% of their clientele, and more so to leave the state open to hundreds of millions of dollars of damages, of lost profits? One other thing, Chairman Applin made this comment that Parks and Wildlife is not going to condemn ranches or farms, okay,
yes,
or homes. Well, okay. Glad he made that self-imposed statement. And if that's his position, that's good to know, because if he goes through the condemnation, he's condemning an active development site, okay, that's underway right now. So we find that fascinating. I don't think the new leadership, Jeff Hildebrand is a very successful businessman. He's not a politico like Beaver Applin. He's a big supporter of the governor. He contributes to strong Republican causes. He's a self-made multi-billionaire. He's a very successful man. He's a serious businessman. I don't think in his exploration and development schedule for his oil and gas company that he would spend 100% of his budgeted R&D money on a prospect that would generate less than a 1% return using 100% of his money. Now, as a taxpayer, that makes all of us furious.
All right, tell you what, Shawn, Todd, our special guest this morning, we have to take a quick break. We'll be back in a moment.
Hi, folks. Tajin, the Texas Cajun here, talking about Food Truck Friday, and we're talking about lobster and crab.
And we're back with Shawn, Todd, and addressing some issues that have cropped up. Speaking about the whole money issue, I mean, I have spent my career rebuilding basically broken radio stations. Yeah. And at some point, I mean, every radio station I've ever worked at, you're limited on the amount of funds you have available. And I have always had to prioritize how am I going to spend what money I do have to get the most out of maybe new equipment, maybe something that I desperately need. You've got to prioritize. I think that's probably one of TPWD's biggest problems. If you've got that $125 million, I prioritize it on improvements of what you already have possession of.
Well,
but that's just my 2 cents.
Listen, and that's I'm a common man. And that's how we all think, right? My wife and I live within a budget, 38 years this month of marriage, and it's a. I think Parks has an opportunity. How do we get to this place? How do you get to something where in 2018, Vistra went to Parks, and that's when Beaver Appling went on the board, and Vistra said, "Look, we're gonna shut down the plant."
Everybody knew it.
Everyone knew it. We're going to ultimately offer this property for sale. We're going to give you the first right to buy it. Well, neither staff nor the leadership of that board, or when Chairman Appling went on the board in 2021, did anything to appropriate money to do it. The appropriation under Chairman Appling's leadership for the years 2022 and 2023 was $3.5 million per year to buy parkland. That's what was appropriated. So when I first met Chairman Appling in September of last year, his comment to me in my office was, I'm a strong private property rights guy. I don't want to get in your business deal. But he said one pertinent thing. Next year will be our 100th anniversary, and it will be incredibly embarrassing if we can't keep this park. Well, the state had multiple opportunities, not only by Vistra, but also by my sons and I before we closed on the transaction, to give them that opportunity. So how do we end up in a situation where we're calling for someone's resignation? Somebody teed up and made a phone call to Angelia Orr and to these other representatives and these other politicians. We made public information requests to Parks Department to see every email and every text record to about 25 politicians. And Parks and Wildlife have made the statement, well, we can't respond to that because of potential litigation. Our response was, what litigation? You haven't filed eminent domain on our property yet. You keep saying you're going to do it. Let's face it, you only have $125 million. That's not even going to remotely get you there. Share this. So that's what led us to going, when you look at Ken Paxton and what's happening in our Attorney General's office, and he's going to get his fair share in this impeachment, okay? And we, as much as anybody, know that what's printed on Facebook and different things, usually isn't true. And so he'll get his share in court. But our government is a pigsty, and we've seen in our transaction just like this ridiculous assertion of a state senator that doesn't even give the courtesy to call us and say, could we ask you these questions? That was a billboard. That was a paid-for advertisement done for a specific purpose.
If we were to somehow manage to get someone from Texas Parks and Wildlife to come into the studio, would you be willing to sit down with them?
I would love to sit down with Parks and Wildlife and listen.
I would love to hear from somebody from Texas Parks and Wildlife.
Listen, Buzz, and I think not only someone from Parks and Wildlife, it'd be great to have one of their board members here. I think Parks and Wildlife got backed into a corner.
I agree.
One man didn't have the ability to say, we missed it. And if he said we missed it, that's what I do as the leader of my firm, and my sons lead our firm now. And I've tried to model good leadership, and the best leadership has the ability to stand up and take ownership when they make a mistake. Listen, for whatever reason, this abundantly wealthy state didn't appropriate the money, not just for Fairfield Lake State Park. They're $1 billion in arrears in repairing our state park system. So this is not a personal moral failure on the previous park board chairman. But when someone's used to getting their way, and when someone's ego gets in their presence, that's why I ask in my editorial for these other board members to gather around to provide some accountability and some counsel, because I think this action is tarnishing. And he's an economist. He's got a PhD in economics. He has his master's in economics. And he's an economist. And he obviously cares about parks. And goodness gracious, somebody can undertake over again in college. They can surely understand expenditure and prudency and how to stretch the taxpayers' dollars the best way. The one to think about doing it is not the best way.
I wholeheartedly agree. Sean, good to see you again. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me down. I'm going to sit with TPWD.
I would too. Thank you very much. Last weekend?
I did not. I've been out of the country, but see what's going to happen. A young man in my office, son, was the MVP player in the Parks team on defense. So
the Highland Parks.
I'm excited to get to a game of year.
Yes, sir, it is.
Looking forward to coming to Fairfield game as well.
Look forward to it. We'll take a quick time out. More of the Dawn Patrol coming up.
Long industry, the nation's leading providers of storage tanks.